Oh boy, I can only hope that I can live up to such a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much. I've never been described as a prolific tweeter, I gotta tell you. That was a really good one. Thank you all so much for inviting me to be a part of this important day. I do lots of these forums and minority male summits and so on, but there are some things that are extra special about this one. I will keep you in suspense about what that is until I get further along in the talk. But you will notice that I call this talk, "And Then What?" That's a question that I would like for all of us to ponder as we spend this morning and the rest of the day together. I want us to talk about crafting a sustainable post-forum institutional strategy for what I call minoritized male student success. So again, as we go throughout the day, I don't want you to just think about all of the energy and all of the important conversations that will be had among us today. I want you to think about Monday when you get back to campus. I want you to think about April, May, September, 2013, 2015. Right? I want this day to be a catalyst for what will happen here at UNC in years to come for male students of color. I do want to just say here, I tend to, in my more recent work, I have abandoned the minority language and replaced it with minoritized. And what I mean by that is, minoritized suggests the social construction of underrepresentation and subordination. Persons, in my view, are not born into minority status, nor are they minoritized in every social milieu. For example, when I go to my church on Sundays, I'm not a minority there. I attend a predominantly black Baptist church in Philadelphia, and I don't feel like a minority in that space. When I go to my family reunion in Thomasville, Georgia, my hometown, as you might have gathered, most of my family is black, if that wasn't apparent, right? But in that context, I don't feel like a minority. However, when I go to the University of Pennsylvania, where I teach and do my work, I'm suddenly minoritized. As the only faculty person of color in my department, now and the first ever, yeah, I'm suddenly minoritized in that space. That is an experience that I would expect and suspect that many male students of color have here. The American Indian males that you have here on your campus, I would imagine that they are not minoritized when they're with their families, but they are here. So I want us to sort of think about what that means and think about not just the individual student, but the student in context. Yours is a predominantly white context, if you haven't noticed. So there are things that happen that undermine the sense of belonging and achievement and success and so on for men of color. So I want us to keep that in mind. Now, in case you don't know why you were here, it was made clear to me why I was invited, but I do want to point this in a different direction. All right. So I have a question here about, what brings us here, and I want to provide a national summary of sorts of minoritized male students in college. You have a local summary in your packets, which I will say a bit more about later. I think that is a praiseworthy dimension of this event, that you have been provided a statistical summary of retention and graduation rates that are disaggregated by race and gender in your packets. So I will not engage you much in a local conversation, but I will talk about what you all are spending your time here today discussing and strategizing about fits within a larger national picture concerning male students of color in higher education. I'm going to do it by talking about 5 alarming trends and issues. The first is that men of color enter college less prepared than do their white and same-race female counterparts. Many scholars in higher education and elsewhere have written about the preparation gaps by gender and by race. This is not only a problem for black male students, but Latino males and American Indian male students as well. So If we are to craft a strategy to improve rates of success among minoritized males at UNC, we have to think about the ways in which they enter the institutions from high school and the preparation gaps. The second is that across all racial groups in each post-secondary degree level, from associate's degrees all the way through doctoral degree attainment, women earn more degrees than men. This is true of white students, it's true of Asian American students, and it is especially true among minoritized student populations. The gaps are most pronounced, the gender gaps are most pronounced between minoritized student populations. Now, I do want to give you one example here, and again, this is a national snapshot for Latina and Latino students. What you see here are attainment gaps, degree attainment gaps across all levels. Again, from associates all the way through what we call first professional, law degrees, medicine, and so on. What you see here are some visible gender differences in women out-earning degrees in comparison to their male student counterparts. Now, I offer this because it is, in fact, matter of fact. These are real trends and serious problems and so on. But I would like to offer early on a cautionary note about this event and all of the activities that will precede it, or that will happen as a result of it. While women of color certainly are outperforming male students of color in terms of college completion, let us not forget, though, that they too are confronted with many racist and sexist stereotypes, that many of the issues concerning sense of belonging also plague them. So I understand very clearly from reading the data that are in your package why you are focusing on men of color. That makes sense to me. But let's not forget that women of color also have specific, gender-specific needs and issues on this campus and throughout all of higher education. Let's not just have these numbers fool us into thinking that everything is okay with Latinas, American Indian women, black women, and others. The third national issue that I want to talk about is engagement. Now, I just talked about the gender differences in degree attainment. One data point that I will throw out is concerning black undergraduate men. Actually, I'm going to do that on the next slide. But what I want to say here, though, is that engagement is a well-known predictor of college completion and retention. Simply put, students who are actively engaged in educationally purposeful activities and experiences inside and outside the classroom are considerably more likely to persist through degree attainment than are their disengaged counterparts. So therefore, any strategy or effort to increase success and completion rates among male students of color ought to include a real serious emphasis on getting them connected to high-impact educational experiences like doing research with a faculty member, studying abroad, holding membership in student organizations, and so on. It's very important. However, despite this importance, male students of color are considerably less engaged than are their female counterparts, as well as their white student counterparts. Now, so I just talked briefly here about the nexus between engagement and persistence, but I want to take one racial group here for a moment. Most of my work is focused on black male college students. So many of the examples that I would use to frame our conversation here today will be framed around black male students because those are the data that I know best. However, many of the lessons that I will talk about here and the trends that I will talk about are certainly reflective of realities for Latino males, American Indian males, and even some Asian American male student populations. But what I want to give you here is a snapshot, a data point from my forthcoming 50-state policy report that the Congressional Black Caucus is releasing in a few months. And it's across four cohorts of black male undergraduates at public universities and colleges. 33% graduated within 6 years. compared to 48.1% of students overall. Now, the students overall number is actually not that great. I mean, we ought to be embarrassed by this, that fewer than half of students who start at public universities finish within 6 years. However, I am particularly disturbed that exactly 2/3 of Black undergraduate men who start at public institutions fail to complete within 6 years. Now, that is certainly not your reality here at UNC. You have comparatively better graduation rates, but I'm going to come back and point out some things about that a little bit later in the presentation. But what I want to say, though, is that I do want to give you sort of a state perspective here. What you see, so I grade every public college and university across each of the 50 states in the report, across 6 different access and equity indicators. What you see here is a graduation rates indicator for North Carolina and public institutions within the state, excluding the HBCUs. But what I think is interesting is that across every predominantly white public 4-year institution in the country, I mean, actually in your state, not in the country, but in your state, there is a difference, a gap, if you will, between Black male 6-year graduation rates and graduation rates for students overall. Now again, this is across 4 cohorts of students, so it's not just one snapshot in time. It's not just sort of this was a fluke. The guys that we admitted in the class in 2008, many of them failed to complete this. It's across 4 different cohorts of students. So it shows the durability, if you will, in the trend and in the gap. So while your institution ought to be applauded for having the highest graduation rate for undergraduate students in the state, and dare I say, even for Black male students in the state, you ought to feel really good about that. You have the widest gap in the state. So I love how institutions like University of Pennsylvania, where I work, love to brag that 94% of our students graduate within 6 years. Places like Berkeley, Michigan, UCLA, there's even UNC-Chapel, you like to say, we are among the best public universities in the country. That is true. But you also have a problem here that's perhaps not as praiseworthy, not as celebratory. And I would bet, although my policy report is focused on an analysis of Black male students, I would imagine that there are similar patterns here concerning other racial groups, Latinos and American Indians in particular. Okay, sorry that I made you feel bad about yourselves. I'll go on. Yeah, so speaking of the next thing, just imagine where I'm about to go here. In case you missed the memo, you beat NC State by a pretty decisive margin last night. And I would like to thank Ticket Lane for getting me tickets to the game. I had a wonderful time. I went to graduate school at Indiana University, which is another basketball powerhouse, and I got to say that it wasn't until last night that I had experienced such an electrifying basketball experience. So I thank you for that. But just imagine where I'm about to go and talking about these national trends. Yeah, so in the report, the Congressional Black Caucus report, I also include and grade institution. Oh, by the way, so I mentioned that I grade institution. I don't want this to be a surprise to you when the report comes out. It's very much like a report card. You got an F for this. I'm just saying. Alright, so in the report there are also, I mentioned there were 6 access and equity indicators. 2 of the equity indicators are concerning Division I athletics and Black male students, the status of them in Division I sports. Yours is a Division I institution, one of the best. You have really terrific sports here. But one data point that I'm going to show here, actually it will be 2 from the report, is that in 2009, Black men were only 3.2% 33.6% of full-time undergraduates at public colleges and universities. But yet, they were 55.3% of football and basketball team members. This is scandalous. It's really bad. We ought to be ashamed of ourselves. 3.6% of students, but yet more than half of the football and basketball teams? Not good. And again, this is at the Division I level, the NCAA's highest and most profitable competition level. What I also want to say is that across 4 cohorts of student athletes, 45.8% of black male student athletes graduated from public Division I institutions within 6 years. That's actually better than the student athlete, or the black male graduation rate, which is 33% for students overall. That is something that the NCAA loves to brag about. That student athletes graduate at larger and higher rates than students overall. That is true. Here, it is true nationally, not just for student athletes overall, but for black male student athletes. This is good. What's not good, though, is that in comparison to student athletes overall, there is about a 14-point percentage gap. Right? Everybody get that? Okay, so you may be less concerned about this national number. You may wonder, well, how does this play itself out here? Glad you asked. So, yeah, I guess it's Tar Heel, right? So, enrollment. Black male undergraduates, 3.8% of your undergraduate students, but yet 70.5% of your basketball and football team. This is 66.7% difference here. This is higher than the national number. In terms of grad rates, you do a really good job of graduating your student athletes within 6 years. 73% of them graduate within 6 years. But yet only 51% of your black male student athletes graduate within 6 years. That's a 22 percentage point difference. I will keep you in suspense about the grades that you get for these 2 indicators. So these are bad trends, right? And I don't want to harp on them. I was asked, just so you know, somebody tied my hands behind my back and asked me to come and talk about these trends and statistics. So I wanted to give you a quick national snapshot and even talk about how you fare within that national picture. But I do want to move on here and say that in response to these issues, actually, not yet. So one last thing that I want to say here before I move on about national trends and issues is let us not forget that minoritized males are also college men, right? Many of the issues concerning men and masculinities, some of them are specific and particular to men of color and some of them are not. But what you see here is a list of trends and issues that Frank Harris and I talk about in our 2010 College Men and Masculinities book. And these trends are sort of a snapshot from social science research, from research in public health, and other areas where people have studied college and university students. What you see here is that in comparison to college women, male undergraduates, and these are men overall, white men, men of color, men overall. But in comparison to women, college men binge drink more, they fight and commit violent acts against each other at higher rates, they smoke more cigarettes, experiment more often with hard drugs, and routinely eat less healthy foods. They beat each other more viciously when pledging Greek letter organizations. Yeah, sororities don't, do as much of the hardcore hazing in that way. They engage in unprotected sex more often and with more partners. They are less inclined to seek counseling or psychological help for their personal and academic problems. They discuss health issues less often with friends, and upon the onset of sickness, they wait longer before seeing a physician. Does this sound like somebody's husband? It sounds like my dad. And they commit suicide 4 times more often. College women, as a matter of fact, attempt suicide more often, but men actually commit suicide 4 times more often than do their female counterparts. So as we think about men of color, let's also think about them as men. Let's think about their masculinities. There are some really serious sociocultural and other kinds of variables that help explain these destructive behaviors among college men. So let's not craft a strategy in response to retaining and graduating men of color without also thinking about the sociocultural undercurrents that undermine their development of productive masculinities and healthy sense of selves. Okay, now I want to talk about typical responses. So I just shared with you some really troubling data concerning men of color, gender gaps, other kinds of problems, and so on. But I want to talk about what institutions are doing for men of color in response to the trends and issues that I just shared with you. So the first that I want to talk about is these Black Male Summits and Black Male Forums. I mentioned when I started here that I do a lot of these. In fact, it's almost like clockwork now. It's like once every 3 weeks. In fact, it's sort of become cliche. You do your one-day summit and you have Shaun Harper come do your keynote. Like, at this point, it's just, there are a lot of these things. The University of Akron has been doing one every year for the past, I think, 4 or 5 years. They bring together folks in a space just like this, administrators, community members, students, and so on. It is a wonderful day-long activity. There are other institutions, University of Florida, Princeton, Illinois, Chicago, Alabama, and scores of others that have hosted similar 1 to 2 day conferences over the past 4 years. This is one way that folks are starting to grapple with the minority male problem. Now, on the one hand, this is really praiseworthy because the issue gets some traction, it enters into the consciousness of the institution, and folks begin to understand that we have a problem. So that's really good. Where they fall short, though, is that 6 months later, when I see colleagues at conferences and in other places, and I say, oh yeah, thanks for inviting me to your forum. What has happened since? 9.5 times out of 10, the report is not much at all. So again, I would caution you to not leave here feeling entirely inspired today and do nothing Monday. Do nothing next month. Do nothing next spring, next summer, and so on. It is really important to sustain the momentum that I'm sure will happen here today. Another popular response is these multidimensional Black Male initiatives. They are starting to develop across the country. UNC College has one, UCLA has its Black Male Institute. The Maricopa Community College, which is a 10-campus system in Phoenix, also has a Men of Color initiative. There are many others. So activities on these campuses range from social programming to mentoring and academic support. They sometimes include, but go beyond the one-day Black Male Summit, to include a mix of other programs throughout the year. This is perhaps a better model than sort of the one-day thing. There's usually an office and a staff that's brought together to do a series of interconnected things to respond to the men of color problem on the campus. Again, one critique that I have with them, obviously, is that women of color then begin to feel even more marginalized because there's such a buzz on the campus and so much activity about minority males, minoritized males. So if you were to do something like this, that is a comprehensive, interconnected set of things, again, please be mindful of women of color. Another popular thing is, and there aren't so many of these, there are actually 2 that immediately come to mind, the standalone centers that focus not just on social programming and mentoring, but also on real academic support. It's the Bell Center, the Todd Bell Center at Ohio State is one such place, and the Center for Male Engagement at the Community College of Philadelphia is another. I will talk a bit more about the Community College of Philadelphia when I get to some effective practices at the end. But this is yet another response. UCLA, USC, your in-state neighbors, Wake Forest, are among the campuses that are offering courses, credit-bearing courses for black male students, in these cases black male students, that focus on acclimating them to the institution. These courses are taught by university faculty members, staff psychologists, or student affairs educator, and they involve guest lectures, readings, and assignments. A key outcome of the courses is for students to consider and, if necessary, redefine their conceptualizations of what it means to be a black man. So it's not just on understanding what the resources are on the campus, or even talking about shared experiences as black men on the campus or in the larger social context, but also engaging them in critical examinations of their masculinities and so on. These are pretty good things to do. The last that I will share here is a response, and this one is student-led. There is a proliferation here and a growth of black male student organizations. SAB, Student African American Brotherhood, is a national organization that actually has chapters on various campuses. Harvard University has its Harvard Black Men's Forum, which is an organization founded by and led by students. We have one at Penn, Black Men United, for which I serve as the faculty advisor. These student organizations provide a space for men to share strategic navigational insights about the campus, for men who figured out how to successfully navigate the campus to share insights and strategies with their others. It also provides a space for men to talk about themselves as men without, having to sort of perform their masculinities in a way that they think is impressive for women, right? One thing that we do at Penn with Black Men United is we don't do bake sales and car washes or social programming. We actually get together once every 2 weeks for 90 minutes and talk about a specific topic concerning black men at the University of Pennsylvania or in the larger social context, and connect it to masculinities and help-seeking and other kinds of things. We eat fried chicken and, foods that are probably bad for us, but we do that because we want to create a space where the men feel like they can just be themselves. They don't have to worry about white students asking, why are you eating fried chicken? Do all black people like fried chicken? None of that. And by the way, we don't eat fried chicken every time. But, it is a space, though, right, where men can just be themselves. It works incredibly well. Now, I'm not prescribing that to you. That may not work for your context. But it is one example of, again, an institutional response to some of the trends and issues that I shared. There are some system initiatives. The University System of Georgia has an initiative that goes across each of its campuses, as does the City University of New York. Now, I want to say that while on the one hand, the institutional responses to minoritized male student success are impressive, many of these things were born within the past 10 years. So they're relatively new. So again, this problem is getting a lot of traction and attention. But the things are often fragmented. Somebody's doing something over here, somebody else is doing something over there. There is no synergy on the campus to bring together in a comprehensive and strategic way all of these efforts to engage, retain, and graduate men of color. Furthermore, many of the initiatives often are led by or belong to the usual suspects. The Black Culture Center Director, the Multicultural Affairs Division, or Black or Latino or American Indian male students themselves. There isn't a sense of institutional responsibility. I really appreciate that Dean Woodard, in his remarks, said that the success of men of color on this campus is everyone's responsibility. It's not just the Chief Diversity Officer's responsibility. It's not just Cynthia's responsibility in the retention area. It has to be something that is a priority for the faculty. You know, many men go to class, right? And many of the troubling academic outcomes are manufactured in class, which suggests that the provost, the deans, the faculty, each have a role in participating and envisioning a strategy for the university in response to the problematic trends and outcomes concerning men of color on the campus. So, thanks. She agreed with me. So, again, I am not saying that the things that I just shared with you are bad things, but I am suggesting that the fragmented and disconnectedness of them and the fact that they're not a part of a broader, more aggressive institutional strategy that includes an all-hands-on-deck approach is problematic. It's a bad response. It's not a sustainable response to the problems. A better response, I would argue, has 8 prongs. And I would try to talk through these quickly, because I do want to leave some time for Q&A and engagement. But these are things that I recently wrote about in an article with a colleague. The article will be out in March. I will send it to Cynthia and others here for distribution to everyone. This is what I think, in my opinion, having now done this work for nearly a decade and done dozens of these summits and forums and campus racial climate assessments and other kinds of things. Here's what I think is a better multi-pronged response to the issues. And the response is what I call a standards-based approach. One other problem with the initiatives is that there are no standards to guide them, or no standards by which to assess them. We do a one-day minoritized male forum, and we don't know if it went well or not on many campuses. Sure, there is an evaluation, usually in the packet, that people fill out on their way out the door. But what about an assessment of the follow-up? Not so much. I mentioned that there were these sort of minoritized male institutes and interconnected activities. Yeah, they usually aren't standards-based. They're usually based on whoever is leading it, what she or he thinks might be best. So what I'm going to lay out here are 8 standards by which to assess institutional commitment, institutional responsibility, and institutional effectiveness. The first here is that inequities are transparent and data are used to guide institutional efforts. Kudos to you for having already begun that work. You all have in your packets a statistical profile of the realities concerning minoritized male students on your campuses. I would encourage you to go back to your respective areas of the institution, copy that report, share it with your colleagues. If you're a faculty member, take it to your next faculty meeting. I would imagine that 1 or 2 of your colleagues might have, some men of color in their classes. They should know these things that are in this report. Usually institutions like to sweep these things under the rug because it's embarrassing. The data that I shared with you about your campus, if I were you, I would be embarrassed. So usually presidents and provosts and others don't want those things out there in the public consciousness because they're embarrassing. But thanks to the organizers of this event, you now have the data in your hands, right? So you should use the data to determine where to locate your efforts, where to situate your institutional responses to the minoritized male student achievement problem. The second standard is that undergraduate men of color are meaningfully engaged as collaborative partners, and they are viewed as experts in designing, implementing, and assessing campus initiatives. Once again, kudos to you. Last night I had dinner with the planning committee and I was absolutely delighted to see that there were student members on the committee. On many campuses, administrators will get together and sort of predetermine what it is that students need, and they'll throw paint against the wall and see what sticks, and usually not much of it sticks because students have not been engaged as partners in the design and implementation of those things. Now, I do want to offer a cautionary note here. Let's go beyond the usual suspects here. I'm going to talk more about the usual suspects in a second, but the usual suspects here, we go for the student leaders. The guy who is involved in practically everything on campus, and we give him one more thing to do by putting him on a committee or a team such as this. Imagine putting a Latino male student on a committee who is on academic probation. I would imagine that he might have some expertise about the threats to academic success and high achievement that you would not hear from the student who has a 3.7 GPA. Furthermore, I talked with you earlier about engagement being a predictor of completion and retention. Imagine putting an American Indian male student on the committee who has a 2.3 GPA. This could be a meaningful site for his engagement that could completely turn around his academic performance. Through the connections that he makes with the administrators and faculty and others on the committee, this could be a really substantive way for him to be engaged. So I am not saying let's not include, the Black Student Movement president, but I am saying let's include some folks who usually don't get included, because they would have some real insights into what may work or what may not work for students who have academic profiles like theirs. The third standard here is that actions are guided by a written strategy document that was collaboratively developed by various institutional stakeholders, ranging from undergraduate students to the chancellor. It's not just a report out of the multicultural or minority affairs area. It's not just a report that was created by people of color on the campus. White people need to be involved in the creation of such plans. The chancellor ought to know about it and be deeply invested in it. The provost ought to be a part of, or vice provost or vice chancellors ought to be a part of creating and implementing this plan. Folks say to me, oh yeah, we have a strategy for improving outcomes for male students of color. And they can sometimes even talk through it. But when I ask, can you give me a copy of it? There is no copy. There is no document. So you will notice that I highlighted here a written strategy document. I hope that you will take the momentum and everything that you learned here today and use it to craft an actual strategic document for male students of color here at Carolina, not just for the remainder of this school year, but for next school year into 2013, 2014, 2020, and so on. It ought to be a forward-thinking strategic document that lays out and maps out a sequence of activities and strategies and approaches for assessment and so on. It need not be just social in nature. It has to also be academic. And this is a real serious academic institution, so that should not be hard for you. The fourth standard here is that learning, academic achievement, student development, and improving degree attainment rates are prioritized over social programming. A typical response is that, oh, we need to provide a space for, men of color to get together to support each other socially. That is true. On a predominantly white campus where there is an insufficient sense of belonging, yes, it is important for a guy who has spent his time all day being the only person of color in each of his classes, to have a social space where he can get together with others who've had that same experience and they can decompress and support each other and validate each other and say to each other, dude, you are not crazy. That happened to me too. Right? That's really important. But we also want them to learn something. Remember I talked about, for mine and Frank Harris's College Men and Masculinities book, that we also need to pay attention to their development as men. We don't want them just to, I know that a major impetus for this event and for your efforts has been the gaps in retention and graduation rates. Really important. We want to graduate more men of color, for sure. But we also want to send good men into the world to become good husbands and partners and fathers and co-workers. All these things should also be a part of the strategy, not just completion. It's completion and then what? That should be a part of this. The fifth standard is that initiatives are grounded in published research on college men and masculinities in general, and undergraduate men of color in particular. When I went through and gave you some examples of how folks are responding to these trends and issues, one thing that I left out is that over the past 15 years, there has been a major increase in folks doing research and writing about men of color, especially black men. Louise Pangwan and Victor Sands at University of Texas at Austin have very recently started to bring more attention to Latino male students, and Lee Fitzroy at Harvard is starting to write a bit more about American Indian males. There is research out there that's already been done. A lot of these places are doing these initiatives and they're based on nothing. Right? I happen to think that, I spend a lot of time writing this stuff. I want people to read it. It's on my the stuff that I've written is on my website in PDF for free download. You don't have to be a subscriber or anything. You just go and click and forward the link to your colleagues. This isn't just a plug for my own work, but for the work that Victor and Luis are doing on Latino males, the work that Terrell Strayhorn is doing on gay and bisexual male students of color. All of these things ought to be a part of and inform the institutional strategy and activities that you do as a result of this event. The sixth standard is that efforts are enhanced by insights from male student achievers. Now, I don't want to contradict myself here. I know I said that we need to move beyond the usual suspects. But what I mean here, and I did say that it's all right to include them too on the committee and on the team and as a part of the efforts. But what I mean here is I'm going to go to something that Cynthia said in her remarks, that much of our work in response to these issues is informed by deficit perspectives on male students of color. I like to call it bad data. Sure, the research methods were sound and all that stuff, but the data are all bad news concerning men of color. Now, there are men who have graduated from here. Why not ask them how they did that? On February 6th, Monday after next, I am releasing a national report, a report for national dissemination, from my National Black Male College Achievement Study. That was a study of 219 undergraduate men at 42 different colleges and universities in 20 different states across the country, across 6 different institutional types, including large, predominantly white institutions such as yours, in which I endeavored to seek out success, to find men whose profiles are characteristically opposite of what the literature reports about black undergraduate men. These are men who were extremely engaged in student activities and leadership roles on the campuses. These were men who had GPAs above 3.0, men who took advantage of what I call enriching educational experiences like study abroad programs, summer internships, research opportunities with faculty, and so on. Guys who had cultivated meaningful and substantive relationships with administrators and faculty outside the classroom, meaning that if you asked the chancellor of the institution. Who are your best and brightest, most engaged black male students? Your chancellor would name these guys. By the way, that's how I found them. I contacted chancellors and provosts and chief diversity officers and directors of black culture centers and so on and said, find me these guys who have this profile. Now, if you read the newspapers, if you read, many of the journal articles and all of the stuff about deficit perspectives, you would think that there are no such men anywhere in higher education. I easily found 219 of them across the 42 campuses whom I interviewed for 2 to 3 hours individually to pursue insights into their success, to understand how they navigated their ways to and through higher education. The report summarizes the best of what I've learned from that study, and it is a prelude to my book on black male student success. I will make sure that Cynthia gets the report, and hopefully, it will be widely disseminated across the campus, because I would argue that if you want to know how to improve success for male students of color, shouldn't you ask male students of color who've been successful how they've been successful, and use the insights from their success to inform your success strategy and the development of your document and your plan and so on? That is my major argument here. Not just the bad news. The bad news is important too, but yours should be a success model, I would argue. The second standard here is that at every level, institutional agents are held accountable for improving retention, academic success, engagement, and graduation rates for minoritized male students. The chancellor holds the vice chancellors and the provosts and the deans accountable. The deans and the vice chancellors hold their associates and their faculty members accountable for enacting all that is in the plan that has been developed for the institution. There is a spirit of accountability. This isn't just a document that a lot of folks, spend their time crafting that collects dust on a shelf. It ought to be like the Bible. You say the Bible is a living document. This ought to be a living document for which there is some serious accountability at all levels of the institution. Lastly, the last standard here is that, and this is important, in a predominantly white institution such as yours, institutional agents engage in honest conversation about racism and its harmful effects on minoritized male student outcomes. It is not enough to attribute the low completion and retention rates to academic underperformance. Sure, that's a part of it. It's not enough to say, oh, it's the student's fault because he didn't study or he wasn't engaged. Sure, that's sometimes a part of it. But if you peel back the layer, I went to a historically black university as an undergraduate student, so this is not an experience that is mine, but I hear it often from male students of color across the country when they talk about the realities of being the only person of color in each of their classes and the stereotypes that their peers have about them, and the low expectations that they feel from the faculty member. If I were that student, I would be disengaged too. It's hard to be engaged when you know that the professor doesn't expect much of you, or when your peers expect you to be the spokesperson for all things color, right? You will be disengaged too. So it is important to gather the narratives of men of color concerning their experiences with the racial climates in the classroom and elsewhere on campus. Now, really quickly here, I know we're sort of getting short on time, but I do want to invite Michael Brickhouse to share a story, a very quick story that he shared with us at dinner last night, because I don't want you to think I am making these things up, or that I'm talking about everywhere else except Carolina, right? He is going to share with you a story that happened to him on this campus. This is my first time being here, so I'm going to let him tell you his story.
Good morning. My freshman year here, I was coming from Franklin Street, and if anyone knows that a few years ago there used to be a poster shop under the post office on Franklin Street. And I picked up a poster, and I was walking up the quad going back to South Campus, and I was on the phone with my grandfather. And then all of a sudden, 4 Caucasian males came behind me, and they said to me, "You don't belong here." I was on the phone with my grandfather, and I said, "Dad, did you hear that?" He said, "Yes, I come from a predominantly black neighborhood, and anyone knows that from a black family, when something happens, you kind of get ready to tumble." I was ready to go at these 4 gentlemen. My grandfather was like, "You're 90 pounds soaking wet, calm down." But one thing that he told me was, even though they say that you don't belong here, prove them wrong and show them that you do belong here. And coming from my background, that was actually the first time that I've ever experienced racism in my life.
Thanks, Michael. One thing there are several things that are noteworthy about the story that you just told. Well, one thing that I think is especially noteworthy is that he's a student leader on the campus. Maybe he wasn't his freshman year, fine, but he is now, right? Imagine if that has happened to one of your student leaders. Imagine how many other students of color those kinds of things happen to. You cannot move the needle on improving success and completion and retention and outcomes for students of color in general, or minoritized males in particular, if you don't assess and gather the realities of the campus racial climate. These students experience racism in acts of, in instances in which they are stereotyped, caricatured, and so on. That has to be a part of the institutional strategy. So I'm going to close out here by talking about some promising practices, what I think is a better response. I am presently engaged in a Lumina Foundation sponsored project that brings together 5 different institutions of higher education. And they are different institutions in terms of institutional type. So for example, North Carolina Central University, your neighbor here, is a historically black university. We have a community college. We have an elite, private, highly selective university, Stanford. A diverse, highly diverse public research university, UCLA, and a very predominantly white public research university, Wisconsin. So each of these teams, each institution has a team of 10 stakeholders from across the campus. The teams include students, high-level administrators, tenured faculty members, and assorted others who care about student success. Notice that I said that faculty are on the teams, and high-level administrators. It's not just the assistant director or coordinator of student activities. Those people have an important role to play for sure. But these teams actually have vice chancellors on them. One has an academic dean on it. Another has a dean of students on it. So folks actually have some political power within the institution to move the needle. Each campus has a team of 10. And they're working to craft institutional responses that align with the 8 standards that I just shared with you. In the interest of time, I will talk just about, maybe I'll talk about the Community College of Philadelphia in Wisconsin. So CCP, the community college, had this problem where it was very clear that the faculty members were afraid of black male students. I mean, as in literally afraid. So I live in Philadelphia. It is a lovely place. However, there are certain parts of Philadelphia where crime is a major problem. So the faculty members presumed that all the black students, almost all of them, were urban thugs from North Philadelphia, and that they probably had guns in their backpacks, right? These were the kinds of ridiculous things that the faculty members were saying. So for the longest time, the institution's response was, why don't we work on the student? Why don't we fix him? Why don't we encourage him to put on some different clothes, right? Like if he wears like a button-down shirt and or a tie to class, then the faculty member is less likely to think that he's in a gang, right? Because gang members typically don't wear shirts and ties. So that was their effort for many years. They were focusing on having the students present themselves differently. Now, as a part of this initiative, they have crafted an institutional plan to deal with the racial biases that faculty members possess about students. Right? Imagine that. Moving the emphasis and the responsibility and the onus from the student onto the stereotyper, onto the person who has these low expectations for students. I would argue that it is impossible to effectively educate a dude if you're afraid of him. Or if you have low expectations for who he is. So their effort is focused on helping faculty members understand the implicit biases that they have about these students. The University of Wisconsin, I will use that one as another example here. Their team is focused on black male student athletes in particular. They have this problem where they surveyed their student athletes, their incoming student athletes about their post-college career aspirations. And some ridiculous number, like 92% of them, said that they aspired to play professional sports when they left. They also went back and surveyed these same students 4 years later, and the number was still in the high 80s. These were guys who were seniors, who were saying, oh yeah, I'm going to the league next year, or that's what I want to do, right? Fewer than 2% of students who aspire to play professional sports actually get to play in the NFL or the NBA. So what they found at Wisconsin is that there were a lot of guys who didn't have a backup plan. They had not crafted post-college educational or career aspirations beyond professional sports. So their team includes a tenured faculty member and an expert from their higher education program in the School of Education there. It includes staff people from the Career Development Office on the campus, not just the career development person in athletics, that person's on it too, but also a person who does career development for the entire campus. It includes someone from the graduate school, because part of their strategy is to help these men, some of them think about graduate school as a next step beyond the baccalaureate. It includes 2 senior associate athletic directors and a couple other staff people from the athletics department and student athletes. They actually have a written plan for helping black male student athletes craft post-college aspirations beyond professional sports. These are just 2 examples among the 5 institutions that I'm working with that have taken these 8 standards and institutionalized them. I argue that is the way to really move the needle and to achieve the kinds of outcomes that you hope to see for minoritized male students here at Carolina. I invite you to go to my website. The URL is there. As I mentioned before, almost everything I've written is there in PDF for download at no cost. I guess, now I'm a prolific tweeter, so there's my Twitter handle is there. But seriously, I encourage you to contact me and keep me engaged in the work that you're doing here. I think this day brings great promise for UNC-Chapel. I hope that a year from now, when I'm somewhere else giving some version of this talk, and somebody asks me, can you name me a place that had an event such as ours, a one-day forum, and they've had an aggressive and impressive, noteworthy set of follow-up activities that I could point them to the folks here at UNC. Thank you for inviting me.